There is a theory currently going viral which says that a man's initial romantic experience profoundly influences his future relationships and also his perceptions of love. The men's first love theory suggests that men are more likely not to get over their first love and that they will pick future relationships based on that one experience. 0207 862 2222. That's the number. Dr. Pam, let's start with you. Is this something you hear a lot about from your patients, for example?
Oh, yes, I do. First love, the impact is profound on people. We all remember that heady, blissful, sort of potent mix of powerful emotions. And sometimes it goes very, very wrong. And sometimes you're left, even if you don't, end up as a married first love, only 10% of people do nowadays marry their first love. You're impacted in the sense of that it goes right into the deeper recesses of your parts of your brain. And that influences future choices, particularly with men. I'm glad you mentioned that because research, decade in, decade out, shows that men are more impacted. And I think it's because, I hate to be a sweeping generalization, but we women tend to process, like, my first love ended when I was 18. I talked to my girlfriends about it, processed it with my mum. Men still don't tend to do that, so they tend to carry that longer, and then they're more likely to try and recreate it with their next partner.
So are we thinking that the first love to men is a kind of ideal, a kind of something that they're aspiring to recreate forever, and it really profoundly influences all their future relationships?
Well, unless it ends in sort of a devastating fashion, that's very true with men. Right. And it's interesting, women might start thinking, oh my goodness, I am now with a man who had this big first love that he talked about. They normally happen between mid to late adolescence. And just as the Kylie Minogue lyrics go, you can't get them out of your head. Yeah. It's so passionate. And so women now might be thinking, oh my goodness, is he trying to maybe mold me into what his first love was? I always say to people, don't get paranoid like that. Talk and communicate about maybe if that man is trying to push you in, it feels like, into a mold, you've set your boundaries and make sure that they're not trying to, mold you into that woman.
Who feels ready, Dr. Pam, to hear the story of Anneka Rice's first love? Because I know it and I want to hear it. Everybody at home deserves to hear this because she was haunted by this for years, weren't you?
Oh, God. Yes, Glenn. I mean, I was 14, he was 15, and we wrote each other letters 3 times a week. And I'd walk down to the phone box in the pouring rain and I'd play Nielsen's Without You from my tape recorder down the phone to him.
So sweet.
And then one day I walked into a friend's house and he was there with Claire. And
Claire.
I stumbled
Daggers
home.
to Claire.
It was raining again. I stumbled home and I was so distressed. I got my tape, because I didn't have anyone to process it with. My parents just weren't around like that. And so I festered and festered, and it was just devastating. And it got so bad that I tried to listen to something on my tape recorder, and by the mistake, I taped over Killing Me Softly.
Oh, no.
And it finished me off completely.
Flack. If you haven't got that, you're really in trouble.
Anyway, fast forward decades and I'm still brooding and quite hurt. And Glenn's wife comes up to me at a book launch and says, oh, God, you used to know my husband. And I went, I've never got over it. In a really dramatic way. I'm now in my 60s, so, we're all in our 60s. Anyway, she very sweetly set up a dinner so that Glenn and I and her and some other friends from that era could sit and process it. And God, did I feel ridiculous, because I didn't recognise any of them.
Including him?
No, I
never would have recognised him.
No idea who it was.
Did you fancy him when you saw him again?
No, because it wasn't about, I can't tell you it wasn't about that, but I've never forgotten. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Are you over him, though?
Yes, but I now think back with great affection, because I think those early loves of
well, they are very important. And the thing is, what we don't realise is when we're going through them, we have these powerful release of brain chemicals, the dopamines, the endorphins, oxytocins that bond us. If you think back to ancient man and ancient woman, they had a very short window to procreate. They had much shorter lives.
Yes.
So for 12 to 18 months, when you first meet that first love, you have this huge cocktail of chemicals kind of keeping you together. Yes. Of course, all first loves don't last. As I said, only 10% of people nowadays, compared to a century ago, when it was more like 50% of people married their first love. They didn't have like a string of significant relationships like we tend to now.
Yeah.
But no, it's that the power you cannot underestimate.
I don't know whether to tell mine and lower the tone of the whole thing, or don't tell mine.
Does it
We wanna hear
involve
it.
tawdry sex? And
No,
what
not
does it
tawdry
involve?
sex at all. No, the opposite.
Oh, right,
really.
okay.
No.
I'm just wondering whether to get
I fell
another
in love with
biscuit.
mine on my 13th birthday. He was on the school coach.
Oh.
And I was still going out with him when I was 21 and a half.
Wow, that
And
was
so that was about
long-lasting.
9 years or something. And he was the absolute most serious love of my life, I think.
Yes.
Even though I met him at school. And I think he had no intention at all of settling down with me, but I would have happily given him a kidney or anything. I just adored him. All I wanted to do was marry him. So it didn't happen. He went off and married somebody else. But I would have cherished him in my heart forever and ever.
Yes.
And I would have
That's
given
lovely.
him several marvellous chapters in my autobiography about the romance and the poetry.
And have you seen him since?
Well, we went, how we went to Stratford-on-Avon to see, Romeo and Juliet together in our teens, blah, blah, blah.
Love story.
All of which would have been just marvellous had he not phoned me years and years later and asked for money.
Oh, dear.
I know. And I was in a cab at the time when I took the call, and the cab driver turned around, London taxi cab, and he said, V, don't you dare.
Good
and I
for
didn't.
him.
I didn't cough up, but that sort of rather ruined the sort of
Totally
romantic
ruined it.
legacy of that story. Anyway, let's go to Jennifer in West Yorkshire. Hi, Jennifer.
Hello there.
Tell us about your first love. How old were you when you met in the first place?
I was 17 and still at school, and Frank was 13 and a half years older. We stayed together on a friendship, and then when I got to 19, we started a really true friendship. But Frank had been in 617 Squadron, that's the Dam Busters, and in 47, 48 and 49, he went to America. He learned to surf, and he decided that the cold weather climate of the north of England he'd rather go down to Devon. So he went down to Devon. We lost contact with one another for 22 years until December 84. He retired at 54, so he was able to come up to our Ilkley, where I have my own house, and we married in 86. And we had a wonderful 38 years together, and he died on the 31st of December, 22, age 97.
Wow, what an amazing story. Jennifer, the bit where he made contact again after 22 years, how did he find you? And were you single and ready to fall in love with him after 22 years? How did that bit happen?
That little bit happened through, he got in touch with one of our old friends and said that he was going to come, now that he'd retired, he was going to come back up to Yorkshire, to Ilkley, to visit all his old friends. And I met the wife of one of the friends, our friends, and Pat told me that he was coming, and so I decided that I could go to the post office in those days to look up his name and address in the telephone book, which I could have done 22 years ago. I went to the post office, I got his address, and I wrote him a letter inviting him to come and see me at my house in Ilkley when he came to visit his friends.
Had you held a torch for him all those years? Had you loved him, do you think, all those years?
Oh, yes, I'd had other gentleman friends, but Frank was always there in my mind, and apparently I was there in his mind as well, and he hadn't married either. So that was it. We got together, we got married, we had a wonderful wedding with all our old friends, and the rest is history.
Well, it certainly is. And thank you so much for telling. I mean, what a beautiful story, Dr. Pam.
Absolutely.
That's just so romantic.
Well, the statistics show that about 20% of people do try and reconnect with their first love. And when that old site Friends Reunited came, I don't know, 20 years ago or so, the stats show that people were looking for first loves, not their first friends. And so people have a hankering often to get back, as I said, because it's like tattooed in your brain.
There certainly were, but a percentage of people who did, of course, just caper off with their first love, leaving their current husband and wife behind, didn't they?
Yeah.
I mean, it was just incredibly seductive to be that person who'd been all those years ago. Let's have a quick chat to Wendy in Derbyshire. Hi, Wendy.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi,
You're wondering about what might have been, Wendy. You're wondering.
Oh, yeah. Congratulations on your fabulous show. I love it. Just to say, it wasn't my first love, it was my third. And
Good.
yeah, and it was, I don't know, a bit complicated. We split up, and then obviously that was, so I was 71 yesterday, so this was like 50 years ago. But I often think about him, about what he'd be doing. And
what if? Absolutely. That's the one that got away, Wendy. Yes. I'm going to have to say goodbye to you, Wendy. Thank you very much indeed. Dr. Pam, you can see the lingering love and romance.
Yes, there's myths and legends around our first loves, you know.